And our guest today is Lucas de Breed, who's Director of Investments at BrightEdge, who's got over 15 years of experience in oncology as a scientist, strategy consultant, VC, and entrepreneur, with a PhD in molecular oncology from University College London and an MBA from Stanford, and a really long CV of consulting, investing, and board seats.
Don't forget, though, I did spend some time also at UC Berkeley, and I swore my allegiance to the Bears. So yeah,
right.
In the big game, I'll be on the California side for sure.
Well, how can you not be, right? As an investment director at Incef Capital, which is a leading European VC firm, Lucas led the allocation of $120 million in US and European therapeutic startups, and built out the investment team and expanded assets under management to 600 million. So what we're really interested in learning is both like what BrightEdge is interested in, how you work with these startups, and any general advice you might have about the entire oncology investing field. And I just want to tell people who are watching, you can ask questions at any time. This is going to be interactive, and either Lucas or I will, I'll just point the questions to Lucas, but cool, take it away.
Great, well, thank you so much, and it's wonderful to be here with this group, and I hope to get to know many of you in this process. So yeah, I'm Lucas de Breed. I'm Director of Investments at American Cancer Society's BrightEdge, and BrightEdge is indeed the impact investment and venture capital arm of the American Cancer Society. So yeah, we've been very fortunate as a young but growing team to help realize the mission priority, the mission priorities of the American Cancer Society through complementing what the society has done now over 100 years since it first came into being, which is to support cancer patients around the challenges that they face, really as a safety net organization. And what BrightEdge does is really to complement some of those traditional philanthropically driven activities to support patients with actually being active in the innovation space and supporting market-based solutions for patient needs as well. So we do that through investing, and we're going to talk about that today, into investing into young startup companies that are pursuing a unique approach to solving for a patient need through typically an innovative solution, whether that be a new drug that they're developing, or whether it might be a software-based solution that can help patients navigate their care. You know, we always say we start with the problem. That's where also American Society has deepest insight, is really understanding what patients are facing on a daily basis. And then we try to find the most effective solutions to address that. And so today I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about what are our areas of interest, what are we looking for in particular, what are areas that might actually align well with the mission of the American Society, and therefore for us form a priority area. And yeah, just to share from my broader background as well, having kind of gone through the journey as a PhD student and researcher, and then trying to navigate a career in innovation within kind of the biomedical sciences, and specifically oncology, as sort of a common thread through the different steps that I've taken. And you know, I know that this opportunity to win the golden ticket and get access to space at Baker Labs is a phenomenal opportunity to really take forward your ambitions, to try to drive your early companies into the next stages of development. So, you know, wherever I can be helpful, talking about everything as call it sort of hard and concrete as, you know, how do I pitch to investors, to perhaps also more kind of personal or career related questions. Let's use this time interactively, and consider me as a resource for you, because we very much provide that type of support to the entrepreneurs that we work with, right? Writing the check is really the start of a journey together. We're very careful when to write that check, but once we do, that comes with a wholehearted commitment that we do work beyond the financial support with you, particularly on realizing your dreams and ambitions. because we know that the science is always going to be, or the technology is always going to be risky, and so there is going to be ups and downs along the way. And really, what makes a company successful ultimately is the quality of its team and how to persevere and overcome those challenges. And oftentimes, through our investing, we actually are part of helping to shape that team and guide, how those teams are formed, how advisors can be helpful, how at some point a board can be formed to be supportive. And so that's really, part and parcel of what we do, beyond just, getting excited about the technology that you may currently have in hand. So it's a long-term journey and a long-term commitment. And so, we'd love to be involved in that from the early days. And I think that's also very much the reason why we decided to become a supporter of this opportunity and sponsor this golden ticket so that we can be part of your early journey. So we much welcome further interest in that, and of course your applications. But I think that is hopefully already clear. So for the time being, as I said, hoping for this to be very interactive. I thought, just to kind of get going, it might be helpful just to share a little bit more about my own journey, because I think that's maybe helpful background. And on the basis of that, if there are any things that actually might sound familiar to you, please, feel free to ask any questions along the way. And then, my journey, of course, has brought me here. And so I can then tell you a little bit more about what BrightEdge is, what we're doing today. I can tell you about some of the investments that we've already made, and then what are the areas that we're currently actively seeking new investment opportunities in, and also how we invest, because that really depends on what stage the effort is, the company, what stage the company is at. So let me start by providing a little bit more color, kind of, behind the resume that was already shared. These are sort of the highlights. So I was always very much convinced that I wanted to be involved in the healthcare space in terms of actual providing support to patients facing illness, and it was really during my undergrad where it was kind of the equivalent of a pre-med. I really navigated the choice between going into clinical practice to actually help patients directly, or rather work on new medical innovations that could actually serve many patients but have that more indirect role. And I think I learned pretty early on that I was more attracted to innovation rather than clinical practice. And then after I completed my undergraduate degree in the Netherlands, I did a master's degree at the University of Edinburgh, and that was really my first entry point into doing actual bench work. And that's also where I discovered my love for oncology. So we're now in the early 2000s, and what was super excited to me, and I think that sort of captivated me, was that was sort of the dawn of precision oncology. And so Gleevec had just come to market, and that was a phenomenal breakthrough, as no doubt many of you know, where really detailed molecular insight into a particular cancer type, paired up with a very targeted intervention, was producing results that were never seen before. And so that was sort of the first kind of, I would say, conversion of the promise that mapping, the human genome and getting molecular profiling in place for understanding the molecular basis of disease in cancer afforded that actually those types of insights could actually lead to such a breakthrough as Gleevec. And so I got very interested in understanding, cancers from the genetic side of things, understanding, all the different biological aspects that are involved. So, the seminal hallmarks of cancer, which really kind of, to me, made what I'd learned up to that point in sort of molecular biology classes sort of applied, because so much of, basic molecular cell biology was tied into that complexity of the notable mechanisms at play in early cancer formation and tumorigenesis. So yeah, decided to continue on that journey. I did some research on embryonic stem cells and actually how, in that particular context, the DNA damage response pathway functioned. So looked at p53 activation, and yeah, kind of continued on that focus on cell cycle regulation and a connectivity to developmental biology, certainly because I was very captivated about this concept of cancer stem cells that was very trendy at the time, and sort of trying to connect the two, where you would actually potentially uncover that there is that kind of core of the cancer, of the tumor, that actually keeps feeding it, right? So that kind of dormant sort of core that could actually help to reactivate over time. So kind of that plasticity that you know was already quite appreciated in developmental biology could then actually be brought into the context of a better understanding of cancer. So that was my PhD focus, and I really loved it intellectually. There was quite a lot coming through. A really important aspect of it was epigenetics as a way of controlling.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I saw somebody had raised their hand. I think it was Jonah Probel, and there's a question. So Jonah, if that was indeed you, please enter your questions in the Q&A. Do you see those, Lucas? There's one in there now. And if you wouldn't mind reading out the question and who asked it, and then giving it an answer. And then if you don't, maybe I'll as long as you're aware of that, people can add their questions in there, because you know we do want this to be interactive, and the questions will come in. So looks like there's a, yeah, there we go. Oh, hand raise was an error, but somebody does have a question. So
yeah, no, for sure. I'd love to get to that actually, because I can directly tie that back to one of the companies I invested in. So if we can pause that for a couple more minutes, I'll get to it.
Got it.
Great, but thank you for that. So yeah, anyway, so shared a little bit more about my PhD focus. Again, the intellectual side of it was great, but I missed something around the kind of speed at which some of that could be translated, and frankly, I also really didn't have green fingers. So that's why even during the course of my PhD started looking for opportunities, and that's where I learned a lot more about the startup world. And so I'm not sure at what stage of your career you may be, and what brings you to consider participating in Baker Labs, but you may be in a very similar position as I was at the time, where I was just very curious about how does, you know, that scientific discoveries and how does scientific breakthroughs actually get moved forward. So, you know, consider that there wasn't anything tangible to work on at the time, but was very interested in venture capital already, and but it was just after the financial crisis of the late 2000s, and so there wasn't a lot of growth opportunity in the VC world, and so one of the leading VCs in Europe that I got some mentoring from actually advised me to go into pharmaceutical industry just to get to know more, to complement my pure scientific background. And so did a number of years of consulting, first in London, where I also did my PhD, and then in that role also moved to New York to get more exposure to US clients that we had. And that was really helpful. And again, something that is really important even now when we look at investments, is that role was very focused on kind of mid to late stage clinical development. So, you know, how are certain clinical trials designed? What are they setting out to do? What data will that actually generate in order to then also feed into the sales and marketing of drugs? So very, very different from being at the bench and doing basic research, but it really helped me to better understand the entire journey. So in line with the advice that I had gotten from that venture capitalist. So that was great, but again, I continued to be very interested in VC, and so and I knew that, you know, I wanted to make sure also I had some more formal business training. So decided to do an MBA. So did a two-year full-time MBA out out west and Stanford, and then really that for me was also a great platform, given that everything that goes on in the Valley, which no doubt is very familiar to many of you, and so I really used that also as an opportunity to further understand whether I could potentially be involved as an investor versus being part of a company. And again, any questions along those lines that some of you may have, very happy to address that, because there isn't a formula. Should you invest first for a couple of years before going into running a company, or are you going to be a better investor after having being in an operational role at a company? So love to talk about that more if that's on people's minds. But yeah, after that period of 2 years, worked with a number of investment groups locally, and also got involved with a number of new startups that were formed at Stanford. And then I got the opportunity to do part of my summer internship at a new fund that was being built up back in Europe, in the Netherlands, where I'm originally from. And so that was really, really interesting, because there was a very large financial commitment, which actually came with the focus of investing in very early stage companies, including university spinouts, because the general notion was that there weren't enough early stage companies being formed. And so there was a need identified for a more active early stage investor. But the beauty of that model was that there was also a lot of time as well as capital to keep following and supporting those companies. And so that's where I learned to really deploy this sort of more proactive investing style, which is, again, has been very actively available in the West Coast predominantly. If you think about how Genentech was formed originally, very active involvement of the early stage investors. But that's certainly not how VC investing worked in Europe at the time, where many people in that role actually came from a pure financial background and were just kind of banking on the growth in the biotech area. So that was really, really enjoyable to that. Again, a lot of focus on oncology. And here I finally get to the question asked, because my first investment in that role was actually in a company called Interna Technologies. And it was not an siRNA, but it was a microRNA company in focused on cancer. So this company was built around having mapped all of the microRNAs. They did a comprehensive, profiling of all microRNAs when that was kind of the common kind of structural elements were discovered, and then systematically worked through all of them to try to understand whether those could be master regulators of pathways that were relevant in cancer cells. So, a screen really to try to identify potential cancer therapeutics within that, at the time, comprehensive library of microRNA. But akin to siRNAs, that company also had to spend a lot of time on delivery, which still, even today, in many RNA therapeutics, continues to be a challenge. I think there's been a lot of progress made, particularly with LNPs. And again, clearly we've seen huge steps made, right, on the back of the recent interest in RNA therapeutics and even RNA vaccines. And so we've come to a point now where a lot of the challenges that were there, which actually require small companies to take on delivery as part of their R&D, in order to make sure that, for the particular tissue type of interest that they were studying, and this company, for example, was primarily focused on liver cancer, because there was a level of natural biodistribution to the liver, which again has been kind of on a delivery standpoint, has been sort of a backbone, if you will, and we've seen that even for gene therapies, right, where a lot of the therapeutics that we have today, a lot of the production of the genes is actually happening in the liver, such as the gene therapy that can get approved any day now for hemophilia A. that blood factor VIII is actually largely the production of that is largely happening in the liver. So liver cancer made sense, right? But I think a lot of advances have been made since. I think as a result, Brad, to your question, yes, I think clearly you're going to have to show that whatever your delivery system enables from a biodistribution standpoint is well aligned with the cancer types that you're studying. So, and it sounds maybe obvious, but it's really important to take that holistic view, because at the time when we were looking at that opportunity, well, great that the technology can potentially enable delivery to hepatocytes, but is liver cancer actually an attractive indication? Is that actually an attractive market opportunity? What's happening there in terms of competition? And so it's very important that the fact that the technology enables it doesn't necessarily make it a valuable project. And so that's sort of where, again, kind of the consulting experience I had really allowed me to kind of think about the end goal and then work all the way back to where are we now? And is that end goal attractive enough to take on the risk of all those steps that still need to work out favorably before we can actually get a drug on the market?
Lucas, I propose that I ask you the questions just to make it a little artificially interactive. That way the audience also gets to hear the questions. So the previous question was, how do you feel about the promise of short interfering RNA drugs for cancer if they've got a good delivery system? Would you mind if I ask the next question?
Yeah, no, but so the audience cannot see the questions. Is that correct?
Right. So it kind of,
Gotcha.
it's like being in the audience
Sorry
and not
about
hearing
that.
what somebody asked.
Okay, perfect. Of course.
Yeah.
No.
So the next question,
read them out, but by all means, yeah.
I also feel bad for you being like talking to the void.
Totally fine.
So the next question is from Nusrat Sangamitra. Which one did you find more rewarding, as oncology or researcher or investor?
Oh, that's really interesting. I think in the end, if I've had as a scientist or a researcher, if I had a major breakthrough, I probably would have felt very much compelled to take that through to the next stages. So in that sense, I think that was also a key decision point, is that I just didn't see myself as being optimally equipped, because a lot of the things that I tried in the lab weren't necessarily that productive. I think also I was really trying to push the needle. There was a lot of emphasis on that. Where I did my PhD, it was either nature or don't care, which I think is great for kind of young, ambitious scientists. But then if that doesn't fall out positively, then, from a career as a scientist, then it might also be less compelling. So you aim very high, but if you don't hit a major breakthrough, then that might also really then test your conviction on wanting to go down the scientific career path. So yeah, for me, the answer would definitely be investor, just because I've just seen so much come through, and I really love that. Again, from the intellectual standpoint that I highlighted, to just see the amount of breakthroughs and developments in all these different areas, and having that diversity of what I put my mind to. We often say, you kind of have to have the ability to be able to go both one mile wide, because sort of you're pulling different directions. But when the diligence, so when we actually look at something with a lot more detail, you also have to be able to go kind of 1 inch wide and 1 mile deep, and sort of that being able to navigate that, if you will. So kind of the breadth and the depth, I think is kind of a tremendous intellectual challenge for me, which I've very thoroughly enjoyed. So,
have you ever anything you invested in made it to the clinic?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, typically the investments that I've been making have been focused on actually underwriting a first clinical development, so first clinical trial. Typically, moving it towards first efficacy signal as well. So think about your sort of phase 1A, 1B, and really spending a lot of time on how can we learn as much as possible from this program, So how can we kind of optimize for seeing a signal on the efficacy front, but also then again the depth of biomarker work that can be done. So translationally, what can we layer in order to better understand and validate our current understanding around the mechanism of action in the context of actual patients. So clinical trials for sure. On the approval side of things, that's still an event to happen where I was involved in something early on that actually made it all the way to approval.
That'd be pretty nice. So that leads into the next question from Kevin Braithwaite. How early do you invest at BrightEdge?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So BrightEdge, and so that kind of nicely, I think, wraps up the journey part of the talk. So BrightEdge was formed 3 years ago, and we originally invested rather late. That was mostly because it was a new activity. We were highly dependent on other investors to invite us to participate because we weren't kind of out in the market and seeing opportunities come to us. But since that time, we really have progressed to move earlier and earlier. So I'm mainly involved in overseeing our venture fund, which is how BrightEdge got started. And so we typically focus on Series C and Series A, and check size anywhere from 250K up. But as part also of us wanting to find better connectivity with earlier activities around kind of company formation and working with scientific founders, particularly because, of course, American Cancer Society is one of the main funders of cancer research. And so we kind of naturally saw that there is more continuity that we can create because clearly, having that vantage point of investing in seed or Series A companies also allows us to be quite helpful in companies just getting started. So we're building it out. Actually, this golden ticket is part of that too, is to create more connectivity with the early company community. And so we've done now a couple of very early sort of pre-seed level investments. Those are not publicly disclosed typically. So those are really kind of just kind of a token of interest where we're just happy to see how the company evolves. We understand it may actually pivot still into a completely different direction, but we like the disruptive idea that the founders are working on. So we can even go at that early, and that could be somewhere even as little as 10,000.
Yeah, that's early. Next question from Raghu Pradeep. Other than scientific knowledge required to start a company, what other skills do you need, and how much does an MBA help?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think to start a company, I don't think an MBA is a requirement at all. I think where it's helpful, perhaps, is just for me, what was more to kind of gain some appreciation for things that I was curious about, but I didn't really understand very well, like accounting, like finance, like how do public investors look at biotech stocks? So it was mostly curiosity driven for me, but no, I've seen very successful biotech entrepreneurs that do not have that sort of formal training, that may have learned about how the industry works and how to fulfill the responsibility of the CEO by having kind of grown up in multiple biotech companies and sort of successively moved up and based on their experience, or people that actually come out of a more senior role in the say large pharma setting where they've kind of learned the management skills being in a large organization and then are able to deploy that in the context of a small company. So I mean, it's helpful, of course, but it's certainly not a necessity.
Okay, Nusrat Sangramitra, I think we've had a question already. Cancer being a complex disease, do you think cancer therapeutics could be more promiscuous as opposed to being based on a single target?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's also one of the challenges, right? So I think there's a lot of continued interest in sort of next-gen precision oncology, right? So what sort of kind of Achilles heel target, right? That especially now that we have new technologies to pursue what were previously considered undruggable targets. So whether it be, you know, those that do not have a obvious binding pocket for a small molecule, or those that aren't available to biologics. And yes, the technologies and engineering is helping us get to those, but that still puts a lot of emphasis on that target, right? Whereas we know there's a lot of complexity, so you may have to hit multiple targets at once, and there's a lot of biological redundancy or adaptive dynamics at play. So the cancer, right, as a collection of individual cells that can all evolve in different ways, may find resistance, you know, through that adaptation. And so even when we think about complexity, it doesn't all have to be parallel, it can also be sequential complexity. So being able to kind of respond to how the disease evolves is another level of complexity that I don't think we have necessarily a full handle on by any means. You know, we have delineated some clear resistance pathways, and so they're kind of, then you have a level of let's say sequential strategies that can be deployed, but you know, we tend to still run out of actual options at some point. So when you think about multiple myeloma, which is a great example there, from the standpoint of, you know, there's a lot of relevant biology that's been mapped and actually can be drugged effectively, but the cancer continues to evolve, and so at some point, you know, you run through all the different strategies, and the patient still needs something else, and that's not available. So I think the complexity is very much what a lot of people are banking on, that maybe advances in data science and AI ML may really help us crack. But I think it's also important to realize that you know, our greatest advances can still come from trying to understand how maybe more simplified context, whether that be, you know, very kind of clearly genetically profiled and subtypes of cancer can allow us to get sort of step of the way there, but then we have to embrace that sort of complexity, and then, you know, you have to think about doing a full workup of the cancer, even knowing that, you know, one cancer cell will not necessarily be the same as the next cancer cell in the tumor. So there will be a continuous challenge to crack that complexity.
Great, thanks. Kevin Braithwaite with another question. What are the key focus areas of your fund? Do you always co-invest with more traditional investors?
Yeah, no, fantastic question. So we kind of, what sets us apart is that, as I already mentioned at the outset, so we try to see ourselves really approaching the challenge, the problem in a sort of solution agnostic manner. So, you know, we would say, well, okay, let's focus on, say, one type of cancer, so brain cancer. Right, we've seen very little innovation there. What's really behind that? Let's try to break that down. Is it because we simply just do not have enough insight into the disease? Again, glioblastoma multiforme directly relates to that complexity there. That really just limits any singular strategy from being durably effective for that disease. So is that really part of the problem? Is it just to kind of getting a better handle on complexity, or is it actually because it's been difficult to run trials there, just because it might be hard to recruit effectively for a GBM focused trial? Or is it because actually it's been very hard to generate meaningful preclinical data, just because the preclinical models have not actually been of much positive predictive value, and so we aren't able to quickly select through programs that actually should or should not enter the clinic, just because we don't have a good model in our hands today. So we really try to think about, so the reality is clear, right? You know, the 5-year survival rate for GBM patients is abysmal, and it hasn't really improved over the last 2 decades or so. Actually, it's actually decreased. So clearly, innovation has not delivered. So how can we think about all the different ways we can make a difference, and then based on that understanding, find opportunities that could actually help address that. So we really try to think about the problem holistically, and then seek out the solutions, rather than start with the technology and then find the most appropriate application. So to your question, yes, we do invest with many of the you know, blue chip investors, but we have to find where, based on our conviction and based on the available opportunities, that the best sort of pairing or match of investor could actually be. So in certain cases, it actually could be that we want to partner up with a leading technology investor, because we do believe that there's a lot of there's basically been a dearth of data crunching, or that there actually is a lot of retrospective analysis that can be done on all the field studies that have happened in GBM, just to stick with that example for now. And so that then really requires a different skill set to help that effort be successful, versus that if we want to work on a drug development play, because we're now convinced about this biological hypothesis that just intellectually makes a ton of sense, because it builds on some of the existing and successful, one of the few successful therapies. Well, then we really need to have build a syndicate, so collaborate with other investors that actually have depth of understanding on drug development. So again, that's also why we end up working very actively with many different groups, because again, we're kind of solution agnostic, but we do want to work with the best, and we do want to work only with groups that are mission aligned with us. So of course, everyone is in this business, and we should be, because in order for it to be sustainable, to generate attractive financial returns, but there has to be a real commitment to considering how the patient stands to gain in the process, because you can be very successful financially and generate great returns developing a drug that you end up creating a bidding process around with pharma buyers that ends up only making it into very few patients, because it's tremendously complex. It can only be administered in very few clinics around the country, and so that would automatically not be available for the entire population. So that creates an equity that we really care about, because we ultimately care about serving every patient, irrespective of where they're based.
Great.
So maybe just to last point I'd love to make. So back in July, BrightEdge announced that we formed a partnership with Third Rock Ventures, probably a name known to many of you. And that was very much focused on leveraging Third Rock's company creation experience. So Third Rock has been building companies for the last 20 years or so, and trying to marry our shared interest in oncology. So about half of those companies actually have been in the cancer space. And from what I just shared, our interest to continue to get involved earlier and earlier, and actually thereby also work together with Third Rock in the ACS grantee community to help early entrepreneurs get going, and thereby use the playbook that Third Rock has now successfully deployed many times. So again, trying to find the right partner that is mission aligned. Patient centricity is really critical to them. It's one of their core values, but they also have something tremendously helpful to bring to our shared interest, given their experience in company creation.
Thanks. Yet another one that leads into the next question. Balaji Sundararaman from Santa Cruz. It's a two-part question, but really it's kind of boils down to one, which is, would you consider backing a super early ideation stage spin out in diagnostics?
So it's a great question. I think again, it's going to be all about the application, right? If it's an application that's just screaming for something disruptive to happen, we are much more willing to lean into something that's earlier. But I think generally diagnostics so far, we've been primarily focused on the later stages of development of the technology, and where there's some clear validation already in hand. And so it's more about firming that up and then kind of commercial preparedness, just because we have been, again, very deliberate on a validated clinical application there tied to a huge unmet need. So we're invested in Freenome, for example, so that's focused on liquid biopsy, multi-cancer early detection. We've invested in a company called Neveris, which is actually focused on HPV-related cancers and actually detecting recurrence. So HPV-related cancers have also a degree of inequity associated with them, and so that's what sparked their interest there. So yeah, I think again, it's not so much that the technology is in an early stage. It's much more, does it have very clear application in an area of great patient unmet need?
Got it. Great. So question from Lonnie Bookbinder. What preclinical studies tell you a new siRNA cancer drug is compelling and get your investment?
Yeah, I think that's hard to answer in a more universal or generic way, but I'll give it a shot. So I think, on the siRNA side of things, clearly comes down to the target, right? So what level of validation does that target have? And as a result, how does the siRNA approach enable a level of very compelling downregulation, right, or inhibition, if you will, that is way more potent than perhaps other existing approaches. So I mean, if it's a validated target, probably there'll be different approaches that have already been tried or that are being tried in parallel. And so for it to really stand apart, it's critical that there's some unique benefit to that approach versus others. So yeah, we would look at it in a comparative way and benchmark it.
Marina Simeon asks, is it an issue for you to invest in companies that have their R&D platform outside the US, in this case in Argentina, although the company's incorporated in the US?
No, great question, and absolutely, this would be something that could work for us. The lens that we've been sort of deploying in terms of geography is that if it's innovation that's relevant for the US market, again, we are the American Cancer Society, so we are focused on American cancer patients primarily. But we know, of course, that there can be global spillover of successful innovation in the US context. But if that's relevant, which is likely the case, and there's also a goal to bring the innovation to the US. So again, if there's already a US office that's in place, that's extremely clearly indicating that, then it makes sense for us. So we actually have already invested in a UK company. We've invested in a Korean company. So both of those had a very tick those boxes. And so yeah, typically kind of it being relevant for US patients isn't that hard to meet, but depending on what the innovation is, if it's a service, like it's a maybe a patient navigation app, or we invested in a company called Paradigm that's actually enabling clinical trial participation by helping community level clinics, so community oncologists, actually become a trialist for technology solutions, and so thereby broaden the network of investigators and bring clinical trials into the community setting. Well, clearly that's something that has to then be relevant and deployed within the US context for it to make sense for us.
Thanks. Harry Gogolin would like to know how you evaluate, support, and invest in software plays, purely digital innovations that don't need wet labs.
Yeah, no, we've done that, and we're very interested in that. So if I don't know the specific context of the work that you're referring to, or maybe you're doing yourself, but no, we're absolutely open to that. Again, typically we find that software-enabled innovation is able to work across the patient journey. So we're not focused only on treatment. We're actually very interested in all the way up to prevention and all the way down to, if you will, to survivorship, right? So how do you even support patients once they become survivors and everything that's involved with being a cancer survivor? So everything really that a cancer patient or even prior to becoming a cancer patient touches and experiences, anything that can support there is within our remit. And so digital solutions typically are more they carry kind of throughout that journey. They have the potential to really serve patients in different ways. Like I said before, care navigation, or we've invested in TaylorMed that actually provides financial navigation. So nothing to do directly with, it's not a new therapy per se, but it's a critical element, right? That the patient is able to afford their therapy in the first place. So these sort of adjunctive or enabling technologies are very much in focus. And so that's where we actually see a lot of innovation on the more digital side.
Right. Kevin Braithwaite again. BrightEdge seems unique in your willingness to invest so early. Are you seeing a growing interest in other investors to invest earlier in cancer-focused startups? Are you starting to inspire others?
Well, I think there are a number of groups that have been willing to invest early, and that's why also our relationship with Third Rock to really be involved in kind of putting kind of translating ideas almost and sort of a thesis into a company and being very proactive around that and actually being part of the starting team of such an effort. And certainly that a lot of that is happening in the Boston area. And I think in other clusters like the Bay Area, that has traditionally been there. I referred to that before, how so Genentech got started, and there's certainly still quite a lot of early stage investment activity as well. And so I think I would say that the fact that we're willing to work with teams that are just getting formed and might be looking for space for the first time, I think that might be a little earlier than most, because then again, we are working with an entrepreneur or entrepreneurial team that is sort of set that journey. It's just that they need support along the way. Not like we are co-founders of the company, right? So that is something where we see a little bit less activity. And if it's there, it wouldn't be dedicated purely to oncology, for example. So yeah, I think that is relatively unique. But certainly we're not alone, and that's great too, because we do want to partner, right? We can, it's always good to collaborate and thereby also even lighten the load for each individual investor by collaborating and having different viewpoints around the table when so much still has to be defined. And even from a pure risk management, right? If you can spread the risk over two groups rather than hold that risk yourself, actually, it becomes more manageable.
Charlene Kuo would like to know how people can get in touch with you.
Oh, very simple. It's my first name, Lucas.de, so my last name without the space between the E and the B, at cancer.org.
Great. I'll put that in the chat.
Thank you.
David Pizer asks, given you invest at such an early stage, how do you get comfortable with an exit strategy and your overall return on investment?
Yeah, that's a great question, because early stage typically synonymous with high risk. But that's where, again, we do a lot of upfront work to identify, do we want to embrace that risk? Is that risk for us acceptable given the high unmet need that's there, and that this seems to go unaddressed. And that's where we can really lean into opportunities that are coming forth and be very proactively on the lookout for that. And so, you could argue, well, okay, well, does that mean that you can take on more risk than others? And does that then mean consequently that you can basically overall, are you going to be satisfied with lower financial returns? There, the answer is no. So we have to still deliver market rate returns, just like any other VC, because that is what actually fuels our model, right? That's what enables us to get access to capital and thereby be able to do the work that we're doing. So for us to go into that very early stage high risk territory means that we have to have a very strong conviction that this is going to be high risk, high reward. High reward really not just financially, as I outlined before, but also because it really fulfills a dearth of innovation. It sort of kind of removes that sort of the dearth of innovation, and it kind of brings the outlook for patients in a much better place.
Adam Brown would like to know, where do you see the future of radiopharmaceuticals going? Is there interest in early stage investment?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, clearly, we've seen some tremendous gains in terms of patient outcomes through radiopharmaceuticals, and more and more of the pharmaceutical industry embracing that, like Novartis. I think one of the things that we've seen, again, sometimes we don't have to be at the front line. We're also happy to be enabling, many different approaches in parallel. So what we saw is that there really wasn't going to be a near-term solution for the shortage of radioisotopes. And so we decided to actually invest in a company called Nusano, which is trying to address that shortage, which is actually hampering the availability today for patients to get access to radiopharmaceuticals. So rather than pursuing one avenue there with one therapy, we actually believe that the bigger problem actually is the availability of the isotopes, and that's what that investment is hopefully going to achieve.
Great. Last question that we've got here, but of course we welcome more up to the hour. From Anil Bhushan, how do you differ from funds like T1D that try to leverage their limited money to encourage other investors to invest in type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, this is a great question, because in that sense, that model, kind of to create, what we call, right, that sort of leverage or that multiplier, or kind of a catalytic investment. We really see that too, where we may actually de-risk something for investors that may not have the same level of commitment and a commitment really being the fact that we're so focused and we're so dedicated to trying to guide our investment behavior by well-established patient unmet need, that we may be able to kind of take that first foray into a domain that others consider too risky, and that may actually have been traditionally true. But we don't want to be guided purely by history, especially when we all know the rate of innovation and discovery that's happening. So the past may not actually be that much of a guidance for future success. So, but yes, we do also have limits in terms of how much capital we can deploy. And so that's also where, if we can open up a space by being proactive about it and by being interested to do the early legwork, we do hope that actually then changes the picture for other investors that then can come along and support those investments alongside us moving forward. But we remain committed, like we do invest all the way through. And so we are a partner for the long term in that sense. It's not that we only focus on that sort of early de-risking and then kind of move aside. We do continue to invest.
A question from me. What What kind of technology, what specific technology gets you the most excited when you see it? You're like, yeah, this is just really cool and is going to have a huge impact.
Well, again, what will have the most impact is the interesting part of your question, and that's where we're doing a lot of work to actually make impact something quantifiable. Because again, a drug that still has to go through all the stages of clinical development that, kind of just overall statistic is 10% of chance of success, versus maybe a software solution that is already serving patients today and needs capital to scale, right? Maybe scale into the US. It's developed ex-US, now wants to enter the US market. That's what they need capital for, to set up a US team. But they actually have shown already to touch patients, and with that capital, they'll start touching patients tomorrow. Which one has the most impact, right? One still needs time, still needs to navigate risk, but then maybe we'll be able to serve patients that currently have nothing. So the relative impact is huge, but it's still uncertain, versus something that might be making the cancer patient's life 10% better, because one of the practical hurdles of their care is made simpler and better. So there is an advantage, but that can be delivered tomorrow. So those kind of the dynamics that we try to quantify, so that we can also keep ourselves honest and have a method to actually make those comparative assessments of what should we support. That's typically just a relative consideration. We don't have a threshold, or nothing would be sort of de facto out, because it kind of doesn't hit a certain score. But it is a helpful way for us to track it, and particularly once we invest, right? We do want to see also that once the kind of say with the drug that still has to go for clinical development, the further along it gets, right, the higher its potential impact becomes, because it gets closer and closer to the market. It's navigating those risk hurdles of being a successful drug. In that way, we also would say now it's getting increasingly impactful, which then helps us to justify also putting more money behind it. So that concept of impact potential, particularly when there's still, say, development risk associated with it, is a really important metric that we're trying to implement to guide our investment decisions across this wide array of technologies and solutions for cancer patients.
Thank you. We got one last question here from David Pizer, and then I think we'll wrap it up. Are you surprised by the limited number of CAR T therapies currently available? Is this a sign that technology is not as powerful as originally thought, or is it more a reflection of regulatory red tape?
Yeah, no, I love that question, because I think we have all seen how striking the results have been with CAR T, right? So you'd think that the rate of development would be faster, and there would be dozens of products out there. I think what's just been obvious is that it's been a lot harder to bring CAR T into solid tumors, and that can be a combination of the relevant target. So CD19, which was what initially worked well in leukemia and lymphoma, and then a host of other follow-on indications. That such a kind of, it's golden target doesn't seem to necessarily be available in solid tumors. And then you have the problem of actually getting the CAR T cells to the right location of the cancer, which of course is a lot more simple in the hematologic context, where clearly there's direct colocalization in the blood. So we invested in a company called Immunity, which got acquired last December by Kite, one of the leaders in the space, owned by Gilead. They have been making progress on a lot of the challenges that come with bringing CAR T into the solid tumor space. But yeah, we're still waiting to see some breakthroughs there. And so right now, there's still a lot of Me Too innovation. So there's still a lot of programs pursuing CD19. And I do think there's still room for innovation, particularly to address the process of CAR T. So how do CAR T cells get made? What's involved? The costs, right, that are still very high. And so there is room for innovation on that. But I think for more and more products, we really are hoping also that the biology is going to get translated, that we actually will see an opportunity to bring these transformative outcomes that we've seen in the hematological oncology space to the solid tumor space, where there's a lot of hope, particularly in certain tumor types that can actually move the needle, like pediatric brain tumors.
Yeah, I was just trying to remember, we had a talk recently on the structure of tumors and exactly why it was so hard to get into them. And it was Ira Melman from Genentech who was talking about it. Lucas, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Great that you're available for questions if anybody wants to